right, folks. Well, to make the most of our time, I think I'm going to get started here because I do want to leave space for some Q&A at the end, just because I do know that this is a topic that a lot of people do have a lot of questions about. And so I want to make sure that I'm providing some space for folks to ask those questions. So anyways, hi guys. My name is Betsy Emery. I'm the Advocacy and Campaign Manager here with Northwest Steelheaders. And I am really thankful that you guys made time to come and join us tonight. I know that there are all kinds of things going on in our lives, especially right now, especially this summer, especially this month. But thank you for carving some time out to join us tonight for what I hope will be a really great educational opportunity for all of us and some good conversation. So for those of you that aren't familiar, I work for Northwest Steelheaders, and we are a membership-based organization. We've been around for 60 years, and we do a lot of education work to educate the next generation of anglers through Family Fish Camp and a number of different educational programming in our schools. And we also do a lot of advocacy work to advocate for our fish that we love to catch and the rivers that we love to fish for them in. So we do a lot of work with hatcheries and habitat restoration and harvest allowances and all kinds of different stuff with ODFW and the commission and a lot of different partners. So we are a quite active organization, and we're really glad to have you here with us today. So I do want to give a quick shout out to some of the folks who are helping us on the back end. So first, I want to acknowledge Chris Hager. He's our executive director. He's here, of course, and he's going to be helping out with the chat and maybe some of the questions at the end, depending on how nitty gritty we get with these topics. And then I also have Alex, who's helping us. She's our operations manager at Steelheaders. And she is also doing the back end tech stuff on Facebook and in the chat. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments as I move through this presentation, I welcome you to type them into the chat or drop them into the comment box on Facebook Live. Alex is going to be moderating that at the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop it in there, and then she'll keep tabs on that for us. So yeah, so that's kind of the logistics, the Q&A, or the overview of the event. So now that we've got that out of the way, what are we going to be talking about today? So really, I want to take time over the next 30 minutes to really describe why we as folks who really fish in the Lower Columbia need to care about the Snake River Basin. I mean, this is a really nearby river basin, and it's an important place. And so why should we care about that place as a means of helping us with our sport fishing opportunity down here on the lower end of the river? I'm also going to talk about the sources of salmon mortality for juveniles and adults that are migrating through the hydro system, and the different opportunities that we have for recovering these species, especially right now with some of the different things that are happening in how the river is being managed. And then we're going to wrap up at the end with the opportunity that's emerging for a new approach and how we might be able to do something differently in the way that we manage this river. And so we're going to be covering a lot of ground today. So thanks for being here. And before we really dig into this topic, I just want to remind everyone that this is a very complex environmental, political, economic, social, all the different things, right? This is a really complex issue, and it's also been going on for a really long time. And so I just want to acknowledge that we should be kind and respectful, and I hope that we can come to this conversation with an open mind today, especially in the chats and the Q&A. So just keep in mind that this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time. A lot of us might have a lot of emotion about it. And so just keep an open mind as we talk today. So why should Oregon anglers care about the Snake River Basin? I mean, the Snake River Basin is so far away. How does it have anything to do with us down here on the lower end of the river? Well, the Columbia River Basin is huge, right? It spans much of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And the Snake River is the largest tributary of the Columbia River. And the Snake River Basin comprises much of the southeast portion of the Columbia River Basin. So when you look at this map, the bright blue portion here, it says is the Snake River Basin, but it's actually a lot larger than that. It takes up a lot of the eastern portion of Oregon, as well as the southern portion of Idaho. So really this entire area is the Snake River Basin. And it's a really important area. But the entire Columbia River Basin has been heavily developed over the past 150 years. And over 400 dams have been built throughout this basin to support the different communities that have been built here to provide hydropower, to provide irrigation and barging and these different transportation opportunities. And so that proliferation of dams and the other habitat changes that are really associated with development like that has had a really significant impact on this basin's ability to produce salmon. So back in the day, historically, this basin was the most abundant source of salmon runs in the world. These salmon runs were legendary. And the Snake River contributed 50% of those runs. So when you're thinking of Columbia River runs of 16 million fish, that's 8 million fish that were coming from the Snake River Basin. And so that's a significant source of fish. And that's obviously changed a lot. I mean, anyone who spends time on the Columbia River knows that that is not the case when we go out fishing today, right? And that's because of all of this development that's happened in this region and the different stressors that are happening on our fish. And so in the early 1990s, these run sizes were so dismal that 13 different populations of salmon and steelhead were listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. And that means that these are species that are at risk of extinction, not now, but like clearly coming to, they are eminently facing extinction, I think is the language in the act. And so that's a really big deal. And when that happened, that really forced our federal and state governments to take action. They had to try to recover these species and minimize the impacts of federal and state action, minimize the impact that those actions have on these fish populations. And so today we're really focusing on the Snake River Basin and especially the 4 lower Snake River dams. And those are the ones that are circled here in white. Those are dams that were built in the 1970s, and they produce significantly less energy than the other dams. And so I just want to be clear that we, Northwest Steelheaders, has advocated for the removal of these dams since before they were even built. This is something that we have had a strong position on over the years, but we are absolutely not advocating for the removal of the lower Columbia main stem dams, the Bonneville Dam, the McNary Dam, the Dalles, the John Day. Those are large dams that provide a lot of energy and a lot of benefits to our region. And so that is not the focus of our conversation today. We are strictly focused on the lower Snake River dams. And so because the Snake River is so far away from us, I want to really just explain how our harvest allocation occurs in the lower Columbia to really help everyone understand and come to the same page about why the Snake River numbers matter in that calculation. So the Columbia River is a mixed stock fishery, right? The lower Columbia has a lot of different stocks swimming through it that are destined for a lot of different rivers. Maybe they're going to the Sandy, maybe they're going to the, the upper Columbia, maybe they're going to the Snake, salmon, Clearwater, wherever, right? And so when they're swimming through the mouth of the Columbia, the lower Columbia area that we get to fish in, our recreational fishery, the allocation that we receive is a percentage of that wild run size, right? So we get 2%, that's the take that we're allowed to have. 2% of the wild run can go to sport fishing or commercial fishing. And of course, there's a lot more nuance to that. Anyone who knows anything about Columbia River fisheries allocation knows that that is an extreme oversimplification of what it is. But essentially, a percentage of the wild run size is the number of hatchery fish that we're allowed to harvest. And so it's really common in the conversations that I have with folks that there's this perception that just dumping more hatchery fish into the river will solve the problem. And while putting more hatchery fish in the river means there's more hatchery fish in the river, it doesn't mean that we actually are allowed to harvest those fish. Because again, the harvest allocation is based off the wild run size. And so it matters whether we recover that wild run size, because that's really the way that we're going to be able to maintain and improve our fishing seasons. Anyone who's been fishing on the Columbia for the last 10 years knows that fishing seasons are getting shorter, seasons are getting canceled. On the snake seasons this year were prematurely canceled because the projections were so bad. And so we are not moving in a good trend line with our fishing seasons, and that's because our wild run size aren't doing well either. And so, yes, the Snake River is far away, but because it's a mixed op fishery, we still care about it. And we still need abundant wild runs if we want to recover our sport fishing opportunity. And that's really the calculus at the end of the day. And so the Snake River is especially important in all of that calculus because it's the largest tributary of the Columbia River. And so if you can find ways to really help the fish that swim in that river to do better, you're really doing a lot for the run size of the entire river, right? Of the Columbia, the lower Columbia. The Snake River Basin also comprises more than a third of the viable habitat in the entire Columbia River Basin. And not only that, but a lot of that habitat is high elevation habitat. So these are the cold water mountain streams that salmon love to spawn in. And that is even more important when we start thinking about the climate projections for this region. Yeah, those projections don't look good, but they look a little bit better if we try to set aside this high elevation habitat for them. And what's the other consideration and the other reason that people really focus on the Snake River Basin especially is that it's really like over 50% of the land area is protected. It's either wilderness or it's national forest or it's some state or federal level protection. And so we know that that habitat is always going to maintain its quality, and that's a huge benefit. And so we know that this habitat, this pristine, high elevation, cold water habitat, climate resilient habitat exists, and fish would do really well there, but they just can't get there. And that's the problem. And so when we look at fish runs, here, one sec, I need a drink. So when we look at our fish runs, the government agencies were required to put together recovery goals, right? The whole point of the Endangered Species Act is to provide a mechanism to delist the species that are listed, right? Like ultimately they want to recover these species from the risk of extinction. And so the federal government and other government agencies are required to set what are known as recovery goals and minimum abundance metrics to really be able to track the progress that they're making towards these different recovery efforts. And so Idaho Game and Fish, they set recovery metrics for the wild Snake River spring Chinook and Snake River steelhead at about 127,000 for spring Chinook and 104,000 for steelhead. And according to pit tag data, not pit tags, these are not pit tag data. This is just fish passage return data from the Fish Passage Center. You can see pretty clearly that the construction of these dams is having a major impact on the ability of these populations to return to their spawning grounds above Lower Granite Dam, which is the last dam they have to pass. And you can clearly see that, I mean, especially for spring Chinook, they're barely meeting the minimum abundance goal, and often not. I bet the average of that doesn't even reach the minimum abundance. And so clearly we're not meeting our goals there, and we're far, far away from the recovery goal. And for steelhead, things look a little bit better, like we're meeting that minimum abundance, you know, half of the time essentially, but we're still really far away from recovery. And so while we might be maintaining these kind of stressed out, unstable, unsustainable populations, we are not moving towards bigger populations of our wild species. And that's problematic when you start wanting to grow the sport fishing opportunity. So clearly the last 40 years of planning for recovery is not really getting us towards that recovery goal. And it's really not helping our sport fishing opportunities in the lower Columbia get better either. I mean, our recent seasons reflect that. As I was mentioning, our seasons are shorter, the fish are smaller, it's taking a lot more effort to catch fish. And so these are things that is concerning, especially when BPA has spent the Bonneville Power Administration, the federal agency that's responsible for managing these dams, they've spent over $17 billion on trying to recover these species. And yet these are the return rates that we're seeing. And so obviously there is opportunity. But I also kind of want to go into why these species, why these populations are struggling to return. Like, what are the sources of mortality that are facing these salmon and steelhead? And why is it hard for them to get back to this pristine spawning habitat? And so if you think about this bar chart or this bar graph, as 100% of the salmon smolts that are spawned at the Lemhi spawning grounds up in Idaho in the Snake River Basin, we're just going to walk through the different sources of mortality that each of those spawners face. So of the 100% of the cohort that spawned 1 year of spring Chinook, this is based on pit tag data also from Idaho Game and Fish, 30% of those die on their way from the spawning ground to Lower Granite Dam. This is often natural predation. So this is, you know, baby little salmon swimming in the river and they get eaten up. So that's not something that we have a lot of management control over. It's a pretty natural source of predation. And so then they start their journey traveling through the hydro system. And for smolts that are born in Idaho, they have to travel through all 4 of the lower Snake River dams, and then they have to travel through the 4 main stem Columbia dams. And so that's 8 different dam passages that they have to survive through. And so that's a significant source of mortality as well. About 35% of juvenile spring Chinook die during the hydro system assembly. And then we have ocean conditions, and that kills about another 34%. And again, this is something that we don't have a lot of management control over. And that's unfortunate, but it's true. And so that 1% at the very end, this is the sliver that survives into adulthood of that entire cohort. All of the rest of them have died. And so these are the ones that are able to actually start their migration as adults back up the system. And so if we think of this bar chart representing that entire 1% of adults that are starting their journey back, they face a lot of different sources of mortality as well. Sea lions, cormorants, pike minnows, they can source up to 15 to 30% of mortality for those adult salmon. And there is some discrepancy in the science there. And I do want to mention that Jamie Herrera Butler, a representative in Washington, actually secured a bill this year in August to increase our take of sea lions. And so hopefully that percentage of mortality will reduce with that. But as of now, it's somewhere between the 15 and 30% range. And then they also experience a lot of hydrosystem mortality as well. You'll notice that it's a lot less than what smolts and juveniles experience. And that's because adults get to take advantage of fish passage. A lot of these dams, or all of these dams, have fish ladders. And so that really simplifies the process of passing for adults. And so they have a lot less mortality as a result of dams. And then, of course, there's our commercial and sport fishing take, the 2% that I was mentioning. And then we have pre-spawn mortality, which again is a pretty natural source of mortality. Fish die before they spawn, and that happens. And then this small amount, that of all of the 1%, and this is all the sources of mortality within that, this small amount is what actually makes it back to spawn. These are the ones that are actually contributing to the next generation, if you will, of this species. And so when you think about these different sources of predation or mortality for the adults, or the juveniles rather, when you think about sources of mortality for juvenile salmon, it's really important to minimize that, especially, right? Because you want to make sure that there are more adults starting the system, especially for us as lower Columbia anglers. We want there to be a lot of wild fish in that mouth of the Columbia, because that's going to give us a bigger harvest. And so we really want to try to reduce the sources of predation that really target juvenile salmon, like dams. And so I just want to give you guys an overview to really understand how dams affect fish. You kind of have to understand like how dams function a little bit. And so here's a photo of Ice Harbor Dam. This is the westernmost dam in the Snake River. And I'm just going to walk us through it. So here's the lock. This is the component of the dam that they were, one of the reasons why these dams were built, you know, is to provide navigation up the river, to allow grain growers in Eastern Washington and Idaho the ability to ship their goods to market. And so this structure creates that opportunity for barging. And then we have the powerhouse, which is where energy is produced. Water goes through the turbines and it produces hydroelectricity. There's the spillway where water is released through the dam structure. That water is not producing any electricity. And then there's a fish bypass pipe. And this is where fish are sucked into the pipe in the reservoir and piped around the structure and released below the dam. And so these three ways, the powerhouse, the spillway, and the fish bypass pipe, these are the three ways that juvenile salmon move through the system. And so obviously passing through a powerhouse is quite problematic, and lots of salmon who get through that way die. The spillway has a bit better more success rather. And then the fish bypass pipe also is a bit better even. Let's see, wait. Okay, and then here's the fish ladder. That's what I was mentioning, that adult salmon are able to take advantage of. And you can see that it's just a series of steps that the fish are able to swim up. And so it simplifies the passage process. And then the really important part, though, is the reservoir. And this is the part that I mean, everything about the dam draws you into the structure, but it's really the reservoir in the back that is the silent killer, if you will. And that's really because it just sucks up heat. Reservoirs are giant, very slow moving source water bodies. And just like the pool in if you grew up in Southern California like I do, just like the pool in your backyard, it gets hot at the end of the summer, right? Or if you have a little kiddie pool in your yard, that thing can suck up heat on hot summer days. And so that's the exact same process that happens in these reservoirs. They sit in the summer sun and they get hot, and then that hot water flushes through the system. And a recent EPA report even cited the lower Snake River dams as being the primary source of temperature pollution in the lower Columbia River, and that these dams were why the main stem Columbia is over temperature and exceeding the temperature water quality standard for much of the summer. And so we all know that salmon are cold water species. They do not like hot water. They don't do well in it. And so these reservoirs can be really bad for our fish. Not only do a lot of different diseases thrive, maybe not love, but they just thrive in that hot environment. And so our fish can get really sick. They also get really exhausted. They use a lot more of their energy store during the swimming. And then there's also no cover for our fish in these reservoirs. And so they can't hide from predators. They can't take any refuge or anything like that. And so it has a big impact on these fish generally. And then the last thing I want to mention about dams and how they impact our fish is that they slow down water transit time. So back in the day, before all of these dams were built, these smolts that were born in Idaho were able to kind of ride the current of the river, if you will, out to the ocean. And that took about 2 days. And that now takes much longer. The recent report from the Comparative Survival Study said that it takes on average 21 days to complete that journey. And so that's 10 times longer for juveniles. And that's really because of the complicated process of dam passage and the fact that there is no real strong current in this water, because much of the river is a river of reservoirs. I mean, from Bonneville Dam all the way to the end of the reservoir behind Lower Granite, it is a slow moving river that is dam, reservoir, dam, reservoir. So these dams have a big impact on salmon. All that to say. And so going back to the causes of mortality, there are not a lot of things that we have management control over. I mean, we have the ability to work on habitat. We have the ability to work on predation, like sea lions, and we have the ability to work on our hydro system and how it's managed. And so improving the number, if our goal as lower Columbia River anglers is to improve the number of adults that are reaching the lower Columbia, we need to focus on reducing sources of mortality for our juveniles. And so addressing the sources of mortality in the hydro system really could provide a lot of benefit to us and really improve our sport fishing opportunity as well. And the science in the recent Columbia River Hydro System Management Plan confirmed that. I mean, then the environmental impact statement that was released back in July basically confirmed what we've known in this community forever, that removing the lower Snake River dams would have a significant benefit on wild run return sizes and dramatically increase those returns and therefore improve our sport fishing opportunity. But it's unfortunate that they chose not to go forward with it. And so just to kind of highlight what that real difference is for you, the environmental impact statement, it assessed a number of different management alternatives and compared them to each other, right? To decide which one was the most appropriate or preferred in their mentality. And remember that this process is being run by federal agencies. And so their goal is very much to achieve their mission. Whatever the mission of the Bonneville Power Administration and the Army Corps of Engineers is, that's the real goal of this planning process, in addition to recovering salmon from the risk of extinction. And so in their data, and their scientific process, they concluded that the no action alternative, basically staying under the 2016 management structure, would result in 2 spring Chinook adults returning to the basin for every 100 that were spawned, and only 1.8 adults for every 100 steelhead. And so to put that into perspective, having a 2 adult return for every 100 spawned, that's the very minimum goal. Like back on that minimum abundance goal, that's essentially right there, right? Like holding steady at a very low population size. Moving to 4 to 6 gets you closer to actually a growing population size where so then the parents are more than, like you're having, I don't know why I just said that, but 4 to 6 gets you closer to recovering, building an actually more sustainable, more robust, more resilient population size. So, and that's backed by lots of different scientific studies. So anyway, so the no action alternative is barely meeting the minimum abundance goal. The preferred alternative, the one that they decided to go forward with, which is essentially very similar to the flexible spill agreement that we negotiated last year and was meant to be a temporary agreement also, that barely improves it. I mean, you're getting 0.7 more spring Chinook back every year and 0.5 more steelhead back every year. So that's really not giving us much more, even though that's the one that they decided to go with. And what's really egregious is seeing that the Snake River dam breach is the only one that starts to get you into that recovery zone, and yet they just wouldn't do it. And so although they had a lot of support from the public, broad swath of the public, a lot of different conservation organizations, almost every single tribal comment that they received was in support of dam breach. They chose not to do it. And there's a number of different reasons why, but the one that they really describe in their executive summary is that they were challenged with making a plan to recover salmon while also meeting the missions of their organization and their agencies. And so this means that they were really required to select the alternative that would allow them to continue providing navigation, so barging, producing hydropower, irrigating crops, and providing flood risk management. And then on top of that, conserving wild fish and species. And so when you look at the world through a lens that's limited by your agency view, the opportunities are much more limited. And so they didn't choose this alternative, I guess. Of course, they also cited uncertainty about how removing these dams would affect the power grid, without really recognizing that more than 2 times the amount of energy that these dams produce has been brought online on fully renewable wind and solar facilities in the last couple of years. So there was some interesting language around that. But largely, they were really punting the decision to breach these dams to the congressionals. So the Bonneville Power Administration is bound by the Northwest Power Planning Act. And that's the plan that authorizes these dams and what they're used for. And so the argument that BPA and the Army Corps lay out in this document is that that plan needs to be amended for these dams to be removed. And also they claim that Congress needs to appropriate the funding for those dams to be removed, and that BPA shouldn't have to pay for it, and that they can't actually afford it, which is true. And so, yeah, basically this multi-thousand page document comes out and says, yeah, removing these dams is probably the only way that you're going to save salmon, but we're not going to do it because the congressional delegation needs to deal with it. And so that's where you come in. We need to build on this breadcrumb, the breadcrumbs that the federal agencies are leaving in this salmon plan. We need to make sure that our congressional representatives understand that we want them, that we need them to amend the Northwest Power Plan or introduce some new legislative package to deauthorize those dams and appropriate funding for their removal. And we need to make sure that we're providing a platform for our regional communities to drive that conversation and not the agencies that manage the system. We as communities, as river users, we should be the ones that are dictating how that river is managed, not the agencies that are making money off of the resource that swims in it or the water that flows in it. And so there's been a lot of momentum on this issue lately. Governor Brown and Governor Inslee and Governor Little, they have all expressed support for finding a regional solution to this and really trying to get outside of the environmental impact statement process, that federal planning process for recovery. And then our conservation groups and utility districts are also starting to work together and find opportunities for collaboration and partnership around this issue specifically. And this is all kind of coming to a head where we're starting to realize that there is more and more opportunity to remove these dams, and we can invest in infrastructure that minimizes the impacts that our farmers and our communities will have. I mean, we have lots of different technologies that are available for us to really figure out a solution where we can help ranchers continue, we can continue to provide energy, and we can save our fish. And the window is really closing, unfortunately, for us to save our fishing heritage. And so we need your help. And if you visit our website, Northwest Steelheaders, or if you go into the Facebook event for this webinar, you'll see links to a number of different action alerts that we have right now to really give you an opportunity to contact your electeds and really urge them to take action on this issue and to really bring this conversation into a regional platform for us to take action, the action that so many of us have been pushing for so long, but our federal government and our federal agencies just aren't willing to take the political process or take the political step to do it. And so we need to let our congressionals know that we support them, that the political will that they're taking to do this is worth it. So yeah, with that, I am very thankful for you making time to come out today. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you were able to learn something new today. And with that, I'll open it up to Alex to kind of walk me through whatever questions you guys might have dropped into the chat. So thank you. Is it weird if I clap for myself because there's no one?
I clap for you, that's it.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, if y'all have any questions, please throw them in the chat, or if you just have any comments as well, that's welcome. I'm not seeing any yet, so let me know what y'all are thinking.
Yeah, some of the other groups that are really engaged in this issue, for those of you that might not be following it that closely, Save Our Wild Salmon, of course, have been leading the charge on this for decades now. So they are a source of tons of great information about what's going on with the campaign to save the snake. And then Our Northwest Opportunity, that's a new website that has come together around the campaign. And so that's another way that you can plug into some of the new stuff that's coming out on the campaign. And of course, our website, you can sign up to be on our listserv to get information about what we're doing as well, and the different action alerts and things like that that we're putting together for this. Well, I guess, are there any questions yet, Alex? Wait, is there anyone out there in the world?
Alex, if you're trying to speak, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Hi. Sorry. I was definitely trying to speak. Jari Andrew Brenner asks, how long would breaching take, and how long before we see more fish?
Yeah, so breach, it depends on it depends on a lot of different things, right? Like that's the answer to everything, it seems. But how long would breaching take? So I have a because there's been this campaign for so long, there is a lot of the kind of preliminary process of figuring out like whether breach is possible, right? So like a lot of the studies, like the sediment studies, American Rivers has been investing in, different organizations have taken up different pieces of the process, right? And so, yeah, it really involves getting a bill through Congress. And you can look at that with different levels of comfort these days, I guess. And depending on the election and the outcome of the election, will probably change that too. And depending on what administration moves forward. There's a lot of things in flux right now. I mean, BPA just named a new administrator, and they are big in this decision as well. And so there's kind of a lot of pieces at the table. And so I don't know how long it would take. I mean, I feel like it could be a couple of years, it could be 10 years. And that makes it hard too. But I think where we're at with the campaign, and I know that a lot of people have been burnt out on this campaign over the years because it has been going on for so long, is that we finally do have a lot of momentum that we really haven't seen in the past. In the past, it's been a lot of fish groups and environmental groups pushing for dam removal. But now we're seeing a lot of different groups coming to the table, right? Like obviously tribes have fought for this for a very long time as well. And they continue to be at the table. And, to see other conservation groups and to even see the public utility districts start to realize that this is a good decision for them as well. So, yeah, it might be a while, but I think that the more and more momentum you get, the faster the time frame gets, right? And then Alex, can you remind me the second part of his question or their question?
The second part of the question was how long before we see more fish?
Oh yeah, so I am going to cite the LWA as a great example of what dam removal can do and how beneficial and immediate the impacts can be, the benefits. So a lot of people get nervous about the sediment flush that happens after you remove a dam. And of course there is sediment flush. But in the LWA case, it did have a lot of benefits in terms of helping rebuild habitat in the estuary and revitalize some of the shoreline habitat at the mouth of the river. But they also, in the course, they thought that it would take like 3 to 5 years for salmon to start coming back in steelhead, especially because steelhead had been trapped behind this upper dam for over 100 years. And so they really didn't know if these, rainbow trout were really gonna, go through the process to even try to migrate again. And so in their recent studies, and there was even a paper published in Science this week, I think, that dives into how shocked they were by how quickly and prolifically and abundantly the salmon, not just the salmon even, but a number of other indicator species started coming back into the water as well. And so within 3 years, they saw dramatic increases in the run size, and the health of the fish and the size of the fish as well. And so that, I think, is a really positive and exciting case study when you see big successes like that, and you can see it gives you some idea of what that could look like for us. Like if we could restore a fishery of that scale on the Columbia, I mean, that's huge. Removing the 4 lower snake dams would be the world's largest river restoration project ever. So there's a lot of opportunity here to do something incredible.
We have another question.
All right.
From Tom Berg on Facebook. How many nuclear power plants do we need to replace power output? How much to trade longshoremen, union jobs to Teamsters or railroad? Water options for farmers? And then is the water impact anything close to Grand Coulee?
Oh, okay. Those are honestly all questions that I don't know the answers to. I don't know the percentage of electricity that we use in Oregon, or even the energy that's produced, like I don't know the segment of the energy sector, I guess, that is related to nuclear. I know that 40% of Oregon's energy use is from hydropower, but a very small portion of that is the lower Snake River dams. So I do want to put that in a caveat, like not even a noticeable amount on a pie chart. So yeah, I can't really answer those questions, but I can try to find some resources about it and share it.
I will say that, going off of that, the 4 lower snake dams only contribute 4% of Bonneville Power Administration's entire energy portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
and I don't know how, if nuclear is the way that Oregon and Washington are going to go, but 4% is not a lot. It's an average of 1,000 megawatt hours per year, and that's predominantly stored as reserve energy. So.
Yeah, the energy component of the dams piece is definitely one that is framed in a lot of different ways, but really it comes down to the fact that those dams produce it's not a trivial amount. It is an amount that generates enough for like a city to run for a period of time. But when you think about the other energy production facilities that have come online in the last 10 years as renewable energy like wind and solar have become more affordable, there starts to be a moral choice, right? Like an environmental choice of like, well, should we modernize our energy grid and our energy infrastructure because we have technology that is significantly less environmentally devastating and remove these dams, or should we continue to let these dams provide that amount of energy, even though we could get it more efficiently? So, those are questions too. There are a couple of questions to me privately, Alex. I think I might not have set the chat up correctly. So let me. Oh, well, Rick Roop sent me a message too that said all 4 dams have an earthen berm that is easily removed. So the deconstruction process might be a lot less significant than trying to remove like fully concrete structures or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind too when we're thinking about the actual removal timeframe. The other thing to think about with that is like the amount of jobs that river restoration would provide. So yeah, we talk about this in the context of dam removal, but really what we're talking about is river restoration and really bringing the entire river, like looking at river from a watershed perspective almost. And so there's a lot of jobs in river restoration and things like that too. So there's good economic studies out there that look at, the offsets and how this would have short-term versus long-term impacts on economies and things like that when you think about the recreation sector transitioning and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So there's, I mean, yeah, that's what happens when there's 50 years of conversation about something. There becomes a lot of information about it.
Do you have another question from your chat, or should I ask another?
No, go for it. Ask me another one.
So is there information on the economics of removing the dams? How much is it going to cost us?
There is information on the removal of dams. I can't think of the exact number that is cited in the final environmental impact statement, the salmon plan. But what I will say is that the Bonneville Power Administration right now is spending an average of $800 million a year just mitigating the impacts that those dams have on salmon and steelhead migration. So, and when you think about the amount of money that they're spending just maintaining those dam structures, which are all often, I mean, those dams need to have a lot of improvements put in them if they're going to come into compliance for temperature standards and things like that too. So there's a lot of very expensive technological upgrades that are needed on those dams to bring them into compliance with water quality standards, and BPA is required to spend significant amounts of money on their fish and wildlife program. So when you think about the impacts, the financial impacts of removing 4 dams versus those continued lifelong costs, I think that there is a nexus, a point pretty quickly, I would imagine.
Then we have some comments. Oh, here we go. Oh, all right. Ronald Richards asks, how many members does Northwest Steelheaders have? About 750. And then how active has the group been in seeking dam removal? How many members of Northwest Steelheaders live in Eastern Washington? I can actually pull that up right now, how many live in that area.
Yeah, while you look that up, I can talk about a history of our involvement in this campaign. So Northwest Steelheaders was actually the primary plaintiff on the first lawsuit to try to rip these dams, well, to try to prevent these dams from being built. And we had 9 different organizations sign on to that lawsuit with us. So it was Northwest Steelheaders versus, I think it was the Army Corps even. I should know that title off the top of my head, but it was in 1970. And so unfortunately, we lost that suit. And if you look at the case law around it, it's really unfortunate because really it just comes down to the fact that they drug their feet and pushed it around in multiple different courts for decisions. And then by the time it came up for decision, it had been built. So, can't make you not build this dam, it's already been built. So anyways, that's just a brief background. So we've been involved in this dam removal campaign since before they were built. Obviously, we've taken breaks. I mean, the history of this organization is sinuous, just like our rivers. And so we have been more engaged at times and less engaged at times. But right now, we are really heavily engaged in this campaign, along with our affiliate, National Wildlife Federation, sorry. So TU is in it, American Rivers is in it. A bunch of us are doing work on this campaign right now to really try to capitalize on the spot we're in. So I don't know if Alex was able to pull up our numbers for Eastern Oregon, or Eastern Washington rather.
Yep, so we have about 85 members in that area, but I mean, I would honestly estimate that about 75% of our members fish at buoy 10, which is, a direct result of what's happening up where that great salmon habitat is supposed to be, above the dams. So it's all connected, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I see this question from Kelly Balcom Bartok. Are there existing alliances with killer whale enthusiasts in the Pacific Northwest? Southern resident killer whales are a very high profile species that rely heavily on healthy Chinook salmon from the Columbia River. Yes, and yes. Defenders of Wildlife, they are very heavily involved. The Orca Whale Conservancy, there are a number of different organizations up in Puget Sound. Save Our Wild Salmon also have a connection with the orca folks, I guess, the people who are really working on that campaign. And so interesting thing to note though, so killer whales, southern resident killer whales, right? Primary source of their diet is Columbia River spring Chinook. And so as our Chinook species plummet, so does their diet. And that's why many of our, southern resident killer whales are literally starving to death off of the ocean, off the sound. But so this entire federal salmon plan, right? It's meant to come up with a plan to make sure that salmon don't go extinct. They're trying to reduce the impacts that they're having on salmon. And yet they don't mention orca pretty much at all. There's like a couple of paragraphs about orca in the document, tucked back in an appendix. And that's the only thing that there is. And so that's been a major issue with the folks, the conservation groups who do a lot of advocacy around orca conservation, is that the plan really fails orca. They didn't do any level of meaningful analysis on it. And so that's just one of the many reasons that plan is going to be headed for litigation when they sign. So Bonneville Power Administration is slated to sign the record of decision on that plan on Monday, which would mean that plan is now being implemented, which then opens the window for it to be litigated. So right now, it's very important for you to email your electeds. Like, I know that I'm saying this over and over again, but it's like right now is the window. Like on Monday, things are going to happen. And then there is going to be a major pivot in how we can like deal with this. So take 2 minutes, fill out our form. But yeah, so I guess with that, let me scroll through and see if there were any other questions in my box. Yeah, I think we got to most of them. So, well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you guys making time to come out and join us today. I hope this was a good use of your time. And I also really ask that you, email your electeds before you close your computer screen, and B, sign up for our listserv. Stay involved in this campaign. I mean, as I've been mentioning throughout the night, things are going to be changing over the next couple of weeks on what's happening as things start to develop with how this plan is being implemented starting October 1. And so if you want to stay engaged in that process, if you want to stand up for salmon in the Columbia River, definitely sign up for our listserv and stay involved. So thank you, everyone, for taking some time to join us, and look forward to seeing you at the next one.